The sand and the water and everything was really important to us. So the theme is Whiteley on water, and we've done a kind of travel journey through his life and his attachment to water. The works are coming both from the Brett Whiteley Studio and the Art Gallery of New South Wales from their collection. The idea came up that we could put the big 6-7 panel called unfinished work, which was in the working space in the studio and which had never been out of the studio before, from the working space, because it needed conservation, it needed all kinds of things happening to it, but it just seemed to me to be as a central pivot of the last beach work or water work, nudes on the beach or bathers on the beach work of Brett's, that it was essential that we had it in Hazelhurst. Brett was planning towards the end of his life, he was planning, which is why the work was up in the studio and he was still working on it, to do a kind of map of Australia, which, not a map, a visual idea of moving from the coast and coastal life and the suburbs, through the suburbs, over the mountains and all the way through the country and ending up at what he considered to be the heart of Australia, which is Outback and Uluru. The painting would have ended up about 7 miles long if he'd actually pulled it off, if they were all going to be that size panels, because he got very carried away with the beach section, which is there. So it would have been, I don't know where anybody would have hung it, but. We left Australia in 1960. Being in London in summer was a nightmare. We always headed for the water. Traditionally, quite often we went to Majorca, to Tangier, and it was before the days of huge hotels and everybody, so it was a kind of, I suppose you'd call it, I don't know what you'd call it, bohemian but arty existence in this beautiful town. Then you had to walk miles to get to the beach, and when you got there, you stayed there all day. After the swim Tangier, which was painted back in the studio in London, but it's making reference to a trip we had to Tangier, he did an exhibition in London called Tangier Postcards. He started doing this thing of putting things on canvases quite early on, but he stuck eggs on, and in this case he stuck on, some sunglasses. He sometimes used to stick on his own hair. It's an element of pop, which was kind of, being tossed around, mostly in New York, but in England too, found objects stuck on things, a 3D thing. It irritates quite a few critics, and it's conservators' nightmare, of course, all this stuff. Whale Beach, 1965, Brett was already into he'd become, once again, a more figurative artist. They're not photorealism by any means, but they're figurative art rather than abstractions. When we came back to the beach, he was into making comment at the same time about Australia and its culture, and the presence of the shark in Australian culture. When we grew up, it was like, listen for the shark bell and get the hell out of the water if you hear it. And, once again, that's true, but it's that underlying duality between a beautiful sun-kissed beach and this dangerous element, which he always related to the duality of human nature as well, that there is both the serpent in the Garden of Eden and, beautiful trees and the apple. There's the sun and the beauty, and there's the danger as well, which is a kind of a theme he's painted all through his life. We found Lavender Bay by coming to visit a friend who we'd known in London, who'd already found the downstairs flat in the house, often to do with being quite difficult to find studio space or a place where you could both live and paint. The top floor flat became available in this old run-down Federation house at Lavender Bay. We fell in love with Lavender Bay, without a doubt, because it was magical, and hardly anybody knew about it in those days. Luna Park existed, but it was falling down. And I'd been to Luna Park as a kid, and so had Brett, and everything. So we had quite a fondness for it. The mangrove, big tree outside was much smaller then, so the view from the house was directly onto the palm trees and the wharf where the ferries used to come in and out. It was just there. I mean, there it was. And he made both interiors and exteriors of Lavender Bay over a period of time, always with reference to Lavender Bay being his central focus on water at that time. And there he was living on it. Light changes on the harbour quite radically. If you get a sunset that's clear, a clear sunset, it'll throw this kind of warm orange glow over the whole situation. Big Orange is about one of those evenings on the harbour. Lavender Bay in the Rain is from the interior of the house looking out through the windows which exist in the house onto the outside. So it's looking out from the studio or out to the harbour. I think in most of Brett's pictures one is conscious of where the artist is when he's doing it. So a lot of the interiors you'll get, with Brett's work you'll get his hand or something. So he's showing you that he's there actually in the thing, and he's either, the interiors donate the things, looking through a window. Obviously the artist is inside the studio looking out to the views. And it is a rainy day one, so once again you get the more muted colour. It's not a bright blue, big in-your-face harbour thing. It's it's a quiet Lavender Bay. I was going to Port Douglas to visit another friend, and Brett ended up coming with me, and we went out to visit Diane Cilento at her thing up there, and on the drive, on that visiting day, we came upon this amazing piece of scenery which we took a couple of photographs, and Brett made a couple of sketches in his notebook, and when he came back he was thrilled at the idea of doing a high colour keyed picture of the lushness around Queensland. That kind of, which is very different from the Sydney pictures or the Tangier pictures or anything, but that kind of semi-tropical thing. But that particular painting, it's the kind of joyous quality of it, really, in a way, that I wanted to have that included. Thong owl, which is I love it. He made a boot owl and a thong owl, but the thong owl was from a found thong that he found on the beach at Bondi. Put some ping pong balls for eyes and a stick. And so it's an obvious beach work, and it's called the thong owl, but the thong's the bit that's about the beach, not the owl. The pelicans were made from found objects. They were made from big palm fronds and things too that he knitted together and then had worked with plaster, and then casts were made from plaster and palm fronds and things. So the beaks on the pelicans come from big date palm fronds. Brett used to go to Thirroul for holidays, and I used to go to Coalday with my family, or they'd go further than Thirroul. We'd visit Bundanon quite a lot, so we'd go past all of these areas quite a lot. And towards the end of Brett's life, he used to go to Thirroul and stay in a motel in Thirroul where, unfortunately, he died. And this big painting of Thirroul was a kind of just something he made, obviously not on his last visit, but reference to Thirroul. How he felt towards his work was the pivotal point of his life. And in the end, until the drugs really became the thing he had to deal with first, it was what he was about. He very much wanted to be an artist, and he was very prepared to do anything to get there, and he was very prepared to do anything in his mind to not find that he was just repeating himself. It's a struggle with all creative people. Everybody has those fears and doubts. Everybody has those fears and doubts that nobody's going to take any notice of you. Everybody has the fears and doubts that you are actually going to be able to produce something that is interesting, that does step out of everybody else. So far, people are still very interested in his work, you know, and want to know more about him and then how he gets there and everything else. A lot of that is something he didn't even understand. And I can only talk about it as a kind of participant in his journey. But where it all comes from remains a mystery. He was very, you know, he's a very charismatic personality, Brett. He fascinated people. He was manic, obsessive, sometimes quite cruel, sometimes very generous. You know, he was a complicated human being.